So today we're starting a 3-week trek that's going to end on Easter. Today we're going to talk about the dinner. Next week it's the cross. And then on Easter, the grave. And I'm naming this series The Weight of the World. And see, my goal is I want to frame Easter in light of the events of the 60-ish hours that led up to it. See, the grave was empty on Sunday morning, but there was an occupied cross on Friday and a stress-inducing night on Thursday. Today is also kind of loosely connected to last week's topic. See, as we wrapped up Daniel chapter 2, we were talking about Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel's response to stress. And isn't it funny how you process pressure and stress? Like if I could FaceTime with my younger self, it would be so fun just to put some things in perspective. Like talking to 18-year-old me to say Matt, you're not working that much. Maybe 32 hours this week. Get over yourself. Or to 22-year-old me. Yeah, there are some people, maybe 5 to 6 of them, who do not like you anymore, but get over it. The world isn't falling apart over it. Or to 31-year-old me. One child is not that hard. She sleeps most of the time. She doesn't move. You're getting more sleep now than you ever will again. Yeah, despite my ability and your ability to do harder things as you grow as a person, it doesn't change the fact that then it felt like you were carrying the weight of the world. Now, that expression, the weight of the world, it probably has its roots in Greek mythology. See, the Titan Atlas leads the Titan army against the Olympian gods, which the Olympian gods win. And his punishment, Atlas's punishment, is he now must stand at the edge of the world, bearing the immense burden of the celestial sphere, symbolizing unrelenting responsibility and unending hardship. And it's most of us have been there. The weight of the world on your shoulders. But here's how it looks for us. You bought a house. Now you're afraid of losing your job and not making the payments. Or you have a sick child, and now you still have to work, you still have to maintain a home, and you have to take care of them. Or maybe you have a leadership position at your job, and other people are in your care. Your success equates to their survival. The weight of the world is a heavy burden. You just can't escape it. There is a gravity to when you feel that immense amount of pressure, stress, and responsibility where you cannot shake it from your mind. Have you ever been dating someone and they said, "We need to talk later"? Is it easy to focus after that? No. And that's what it's like for people with intense responsibility and stress. Have you ever seen the photos of the presidents from year 1 to year 8? Apparently they age in dog years because they don't age like the rest of us. They go from being young and vibrant to old and decrepit in a short amount of time. And the reason I say this is because this is almost exactly where Jesus was on his final night. He's having one final meal with his closest friends. And unlike Atlas, who is mythically punished to bear the weight of the world, Jesus volunteers to carry it. Jesus felt the events and the moments of Holy Week. Within the next 24 hours of Jesus' life, he's going to carry the weight of the world. He's going to have intense suffering, betrayal, abandonment. And if you look for the clues within the Bible, you can see that the upcoming events are never far from being at the forefront of his mind the entire time. All 4 Gospels record the Last Supper. Here's Luke's account in Luke 22. It starts in verse 7. It says, "Now the festival of unleavened bread arrived, when the Passover lamb is sacrificed. Jesus sent Peter and John ahead and said, 'Go and prepare the Passover meal so we can eat it together.' 'Now, where do you want us to prepare it?' they asked him. And so Jesus said, 'I want you to go and get a table for 26. And they're like, 26? He's like, "Well, yeah, I want to take a photo." Okay, I stole that joke. It's Passover. The Passover meal commemorates the Israelites' liberation from their slavery in Egypt. In the second book of the Bible, Exodus, we learn that God sends 9 plagues on the Egyptians, but it's not until the 10th one that their bondage is broken. God goes into Egypt and he kills the firstborn of every home without the blood from a sacrifice painted on the door. And once released, God made the Hebrews promise that they have to celebrate this meal every year. Verse 14 says, "When the time came, Jesus and the apostles sat down together at the table. And Jesus said, 'I've been eager to eat this Passover meal with you before my sufferings begin. For I tell you now that I won't eat this meal again until its meaning is fulfilled in the kingdom of God.'" I mean, did you notice? What was the very first thing he says? He says, "My suffering is about to begin." And because of that, this meal means something. I mean, granted, we don't know Jesus' compartmentalization ability, but the fact that he's bringing it up, and especially with what happens later, it makes me think that in the back of his mind, this suffering, like what's about to happen, is not going anywhere. That's almost like that low hum, just cannot escape it. You can't ignore it. It's just constantly there. Maybe you've been in a position where you knew you were getting fired. What was the day like leading up to that meeting? Or maybe you were going into active combat for the very first time. How'd you sleep the night before? Not nearly on those levels, but one time I was dating a girl and I knew I needed to break up. So I asked my friends, what should I do? And they gave me this advice. They're like, "Matt, tell her you're not ready to go to the next level." And I thought, that's good. I can work with that. So for like 2 to 3 days, all I can think about is the dread of that conversation. And here's where it goes. Finally, it's Saturday, and I can finally have this conversation. I invite her to Starbucks, which is halfway between our apartments, should have been her first clue. And we sit down, and I go into my whole preamble of like, "Man, you're great. The last few months have been so fun." And then I say my line, and she gets the biggest smile on her face. And I think, man, this is great. We're all on the same page. And she says to me, "You want to take it to the next level?" I'm like, no, not the next level. I'm like, I made this worse. But leading up to it, it was incredibly stressful. And I think you've been there. You know that there have been times where your stress is so high, it eclipses everything. There are other times when it's similar to just turning music on in the background and turning the volume up, and you just cannot escape it, and it drowns out all of your other thoughts. I am confident Jesus feels the stress of the upcoming moments, but he's also not paralyzed by it. John's gospel has 5 chapters devoted to the events of the dinner, and I'm sure he could have filled up at least 5 more. Now, in Luke's account, though, it says in verse 19 that he took some of the bread and he gave thanks to God for it. Then he broke it in pieces and gave it to the disciples, saying, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And after supper, he took another cup of wine and said, "This cup is the new covenant between God and his people, an agreement confirmed with my blood, which is poured out as a sacrifice for you." During this meal, commemorating the Passover, the bread is given and broken into pieces. Originally, a lamb was given for the Hebrews, and in this new covenant, it's Jesus' body. Similar with the cup of wine. It had been the blood of a lamb on the doorpost that turned away the wrath of God, and now it would be Jesus' blood. This was the fulfillment of the Passover in front of their very eyes. Every Passover meal they had annually was looking forward to this moment, whether they knew it or not. His sacrifice was the transition from the old covenant of needing to sacrifice bulls, goats, and sheep, and now it was the sacrifice of God's only Son. Yet it's not just the pain of the cross, it's also the pain of how he gets there that is eclipsing and causing weight to Jesus' thoughts. It says in verse 21, "But here at this table, sitting among us as a friend, is the man who will betray me. For it has been determined that the Son of Man must die. But what sorrow awaits the one who betrays him?" The disciples began to ask each other, which of them would ever do such a thing? Jesus is reminding them, the reason he's going to the cross, outside of taking on the weight of the world in the form of our sin debt that we owe to God, but one of the catalysts that's going to lead to this is because one is sitting among them who was a friend and is now going to betray them. See, some of you have felt the sting of someone you loved and trusted turning on you. Maybe it was a spouse or a friend, a parent, maybe even a child. And from what I gather from talking to numerous people who've experienced just the pain and the sting of betrayal, Virtually nothing prepares you for it. See, Jesus is not only feeling the sting from an impending crucifixion, but the dissolution of his circle. And it doesn't stop there either. There's more that is weighing on him at this dinner. It says in verse 31, "Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift each of you like wheat. But I have pleaded in prayer for you, Simon, that your faith should not fail. So when you have repented and turned to me again, strengthen your brothers." And Peter said, "Lord, I am ready to go to prison with you and even to die with you." But Jesus said, "Peter, let me tell you something. Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will deny 3 times that you even know me." Now, don't get confused here. Peter has 2 names, Simon and Peter, same guy. And apparently, from what we're reading, Satan is requesting to destroy him. Now, some speculate that Satan actually wanted to use Peter to betray Jesus instead of Judas. And in the middle of everything else happening in Jesus' life, he has to contend and pray over Peter's role. And I get it. Maybe this wasn't Satan's play to make Peter into Judas. Maybe it was just Satan's attempt to knock out one of Jesus' friends at the knees. The thing is, the outcome is Jesus needs to plead for Peter, just for him to deny knowing him a little while later. And so after a very long dinner of lots of conversation and twists and turns, Jesus takes the remaining 11 disciples, because Judas has already left to go and betray him to the religious leaders. So he takes the other 11 for a night in the Garden of Gethsemane. And it says in verse 39, "Then accompanied by his disciples, Jesus left the upstairs room and went as usual to the Mount of Olives. And there he told them, 'Pray that you will not give in to temptation.' And he walked away about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and he prayed, 'Father, if you are willing, please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine.' And then an angel from heaven appeared and strengthened him. He prayed more fervently, and he was in such agony of spirit that his sweat fell to the ground like great drops of blood. And at last he stood up again, and he returned to the disciples, only to find them asleep, exhausted from grief. 'Why are you sleeping?' he asked them. 'Get up and pray, so that you will not give in to temptation.'" I mean, from what we just read, Jesus feels such agony that his sweat turns to blood. I mean, more likely what happens, the capillaries in his face, because of the stress, they rupture. And he asks his friends, "Can you pray with me?" And what do? They go to sleep. On the night before his crucifixion, Jesus is feeling the weight of the world. The suffering was on his mind, rarely leaving his thoughts. A friend was going to betray him. Another friend is going to deny him. He doesn't have the relational support, even in prayer, that he's asking for. On the night of the betrayal, 2 of Jesus' darkest moments are symbolized by 2 things, bread and a cup. Now, it's not explicit in Luke's passage, but in John's account, we get this in John 13, 26 through 27. It says, Jesus responded, "It's the one to whom I give the bread that I dip in the bowl," meaning like who's going to betray him. "And when he dipped it, he gave it to Judas, son of Simon Iscariot. And when Judas had eaten the bread, Satan entered into him. Then Jesus told him, 'Hurry and do what you're going to do.'" The bread is the identifier of the betrayer. I mean, to share bread and a bowl at a meal would have been a symbol of immense trust. Now, that's not the only identifier of the coming heartache. It says in Luke 22, 41 through 42, he walked away about a stone's throw. This is his prayer that he has to God. And he says, "Father, if you are willing, please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine." In the Old Testament, God's wrath was sometimes metaphorically referred to as a cup. And to be clear, like he is praying like, "Hey, God, remove this cup." And to be like Jesus is not out of alignment with God. But I just want to point out, he's not weak in this moment. This is a very normal human response. The weight of the world is on his shoulders. And he's saying, like, there are a couple things that are holding, like, are symbolizing what I'm going through. the person who I'm sharing this bread and this cup of suffering that I'm about to experience. See, I don't know about you, but like when experiencing deeply emotional seasons, there are items that can take on symbolic significance of the heartache. When I was 11 years old, my family moved from Denver to Kansas, and frankly, they're kind of close in mileage, only 388 miles apart, but they were a world apart culturally. See, Denver was mountains, it was metropolitan, a little town in Kansas called Hutchinson. It was rural, it was flat, and even bigger than that, like the friends that I moved away from. And I remember at 11, it was a hard move, and there was a CD that was given to me right before it, and I listened to it all the time for the first 6 to 8 weeks that we were living in this new city. And it's funny, to this day, I get no enjoyment when one of those songs ever comes on, right? Because it has this connection to a time that I just did not like. And for some of you, it's certain foods or neighborhoods. It was smells, it was people, and they're just toxic to you now. And the thing is, if you let it, hard seasons of carrying the weight of the world can harden you and they can numb you. Things that used to be good now make you want to throw up. You don't let others in anymore because you didn't just get cheated on, you lost your ability to trust another person. Or you didn't just get fired, you lost your confidence and you can't seem to do any job anymore. Carrying the weight of the world didn't make you stronger, it broke your back. So, when you are in the trenches and the world feels like it's on your shoulders, let's take a lesson from what Jesus did on his final night. One of the first things that we just see Jesus do in this moment is keep doing the right thing even when it's hard. Jesus didn't punt on the night just because it was about to get bad. His mission of connecting the Old Testament to the New Covenant was something he wasn't going to fall through on. See, you may want to quit. You might want to sabotage, or you might want to just defer. But I'm telling you, keep working on your marriage. Keep fighting that addiction. Keep making those payments. Keep going to school. Keep working hard. Keep showing up for your kids. Pray for toughness like Jesus. Don't give your emotions the permission to take over. Which is important because the second thing is this. Don't bottle up your emotions because you think it's weak or awkward. At the right moment, Jesus agonized and needed comfort from others. That's not weakness. It's human. You are an emotional being. Don't convince yourself you're not. The key is to keep your emotions in the right spot. They are great passengers. They are terrible pilots. Here's the third thing we learn from Jesus. Don't quit on others just because somebody quit on you. Yes, Judas betrayed Jesus. Yes, Peter denied Jesus. No, Jesus didn't send everyone else packing. He fed them, he prayed for them, he even washed their feet. Judas is included. See, if you've ever been betrayed, you may have learned that you need better boundaries. And if you've been betrayed, you may be tempted just to build a castle around yourself instead. But I'm telling you, don't quit on others. Here's another lesson we learned. Big moments need big prayers. He didn't just rest up before the big day. He went deep in prayer. He knows that every minute with the Father in prayer is better than a minute anywhere else doing anything else. It reminds me of the words of the Apostle Paul later in the New Testament in Philippians 4:6, where he says, don't worry about anything, which is thinking the same thought over and over and over. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank him for all he has done. And here's the last thing. Don't underestimate God's ability to redeem any situation. There's two things that symbolized the heartache that was coming. Bread and a cup. It was the person whom he shared bread with that night. It was the cup of God's wrath about to be poured out. But today, the bread and the cup are now a symbol of hope. See, your worst moment can be redeemed to be your biggest highlight. See, I'm not saying that the heartache becomes happy, but God can redeem it. It's fascinating that those two items are used to typify the hardness of the night. They're also used in the explanation of why Christ was there and why he he would suffer to begin with. I mean, to this day, Christians gather the world over to partake in what we call the Lord's Supper, communion. To remind you, Luke 22, 19 through 20 says, he took some bread and he gave thanks to it. Then he broke it in pieces and gave it to the disciples, saying, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And after supper, he took another cup of wine and said, this cup is the new covenant between God and his people, an agreement confirmed with my blood, which is poured out as a sacrifice for you. His body is given, and his blood is poured, and it has changed everything. And there's not a greater display of love than laying his own life down. He allowed himself to be beaten and bloodied for the people who did not deserve it and had moments of being hard to love. And it's amazing that God was able to redeem two of the hardest things in Jesus' life to where now we look at that as a symbol of hope. And he can do the same thing in your life. That one of the worst things that you've ever gone through, one of the hardest seasons you've ever had to endure, those times in life where it really felt like the weight of the world was on your shoulders, he can redeem those situations. And how do I know this? Because he did this with the cross. And next week, we're looking at the events of the cross. The thing is, Jesus on the cross is a hard thing to look directly at, because he takes upon himself the brunt force of God's judgment and wrath, and he doesn't deserve any of it, and he's taking it for us. My hope is that as we head into Easter in the next few weeks, that we can see that the events surrounding Easter Sunday were important, that they bring greater depth and appreciation to what happened on that evening. And so, as you head into this next week, I am praying that for those who feel like the weight of the world is on your shoulders, that God will show you that he took that on himself so that you don't have to feel that same weight or pressure. I'm also hoping that for some of you who have gone through intense seasons of pain and suffering can look at how Jesus also endured those same types of emotions, and he made it through, and he is giving you the ability to endure that as well. And for those of you who just need to be reminded that you have a God who is sympathetic to you, that he has endured what you have endured, and that when you pray to him, he's not some being out in heaven that has never walked where you walked, and that you can know that he is sympathetic to us, that he's been there, he's cried out, he's prayed for God to remove something, and he's had to endure it, and you can too. So let me pray for you. God, thank you for your cross. Thank you for your ability to endure pain and suffering and to give us hope on the other side of it. God, I'm praying that you would redeem the situations that we go through, that God, the weight of the world as they're thrust upon our shoulders would not weigh us down to the place where we lose our hope, but rather they could be a catalyst for believing that you are not done doing great things in our lives. God, I pray for those who need to say yes to you, that God, that maybe for the first time it has made sense that you are a God who's endured what we could not for our benefit, that God, you took upon yourself the weight of the world. And God, I'm praying that you would put this prayer on the lips of these people of God, I am in need of a Savior. Lord, I'm asking you to forgive me my sins and take full control of my life. God, I'm praying for the Christian who needs the hope to remember that you can redeem any situation or circumstance. And God, I am praying that you would give us victory as we head into Easter, that we could see that you have taken it all upon yourself so that we can be the beneficiaries. And I pray this all in your son Jesus' name. Amen.